Thanks for asking us to speak today. I'm really pleased to be able to talk about, I suppose, the topic of eating disorders at Christmas, because as we know, there's such a huge focus on food and that's such a big part of Christmas. So, can you hear me okay? I suppose what I just wanted to start with was to maybe say a few words about how Bodywise understands an eating disorder, what it is for a person. And I suppose there's lots of different perspectives that are taken when thinking about eating disorders. And for us, we think of it in a very simple and a very general way. We understand it as a coping mechanism that a person uses, engages in order to cope with whatever's going on for them in their life. So instead of feeling a certain way, they engage in some kind of disordered eating behaviour, mixed up with some control of themselves, of their body, of their world. And that's really important to understand, that an eating disorder has a function for the person in their life. And if we can think of the eating disorder having that kind of a function for a person, if we can think that it is this thing that makes a person feel safe, although ultimately it's very destructive for them and destructive in the family, and destructive in their lives, and it's actually not serving them. But if we can understand that for them, it does have a function and it is doing something to help them feel safe and secure, we can maybe better understand why they would cling to it and why they would be defensive when we try to talk to them about it, and why at certain times during the year it might intensify for a person. And I think Christmas is one of those times where eating issues and eating disorders can become very intense for a person, because the focus is so much on enjoying yourself, on partying, on meeting with people that you might not always meet, on eating, on drinking. And all of those things for a person with an eating disorder are very difficult because they're outside normal routine, and they involve lots of things that might not normally fit into their day. So when we think about coping at Christmas, we have to think about how can we make Christmas a bit easier for a person with an eating disorder. And I suppose I'm going to run through a few things as well. But just to refer back to this thinking, this all or nothing thinking. Again, a person with an eating disorder often has that type of all or nothing thinking. And the pressure to make a perfect Christmas and for everything to be okay can also feed into that eating disorder side of their heads. So they will want everything to be okay. And usually a person is also very super sensitive to how everybody else is feeling. And they want everyone to be happy. And they don't want to be the ones in the family who might be causing stress or causing anxiety or causing problems. So in that way also it can intensify things for a person at Christmas. And I suppose I've been working in Bodywise for about 8 years now. And when I started working, I thought that Christmas was going to be a really busy time for us. Christmas and Easter, I reckoned, would be the really busy times on the helpline or on our email support. And actually, everything goes completely quiet. Nobody contacts us. Our helpline goes really, really quiet. And I reckon that what's happening is that people are simply coping with Christmas. And the idea of talking about what's going on for them is just too difficult for them. They want to kind of get through Christmas, manage it all in whatever way they can. And then when we get to kind of the middle of January, the end of January and February, then they start to think about tackling things. So I think that that's telling us something about how we can help a person to cope at Christmas. That maybe Christmas isn't a time for dealing with all the issues around the eating disorder. And maybe Christmas is a time where we can listen to the person and where we can try and understand what they need within the family or within wherever they're spending Christmas to help it feel a bit safer for them. Because again, if you think about how the eating disorder is functioning to make them feel safe, if they don't feel safe and secure, they're going to retreat into it to create that sense. So in the family, in the house, as much as possible, we want to try and create a space where they don't feel they'll need to retreat into the eating disorder to feel okay. So I think it's important for the person to try and not isolate themselves. And if you have somebody in your house who might have an eating disorder, to try not to isolate them, to try and involve them as much as you can in the preparation, in the planning, because a routine will be really important for them. Knowing what's going to happen will be really important for them. Knowing what foods are going to be there, knowing what's going to be expected of them will be really important for them. So it's important to not isolate the person, and also to try and let them talk about how they're feeling. Get them to talk about what their fears might be around the day or the 3 days, this kind of Christmas Eve, Christmas Day and Stephen's Day. Talk about their fears around food. What foods might be very difficult for them. And it might be that they're kind of blowing it all up in their heads as well. It's the idea that they're going to be put at the table and have to eat everything. And that might, again, if we think back to the all or nothing thinking, it might be, well, I can't eat it all, so I'm going to eat nothing. And that's not the situation we want to get in. We want to get into a situation where they feel safe so that they can be a part of the Christmas celebration, but not feel that pressure. Okay? So, yeah, it's important to get them to talk about their fears around food. Not only will this ease the stress for them, but it might also ease your stress around it. I think for family, they can also get very stressed about the stress that the person with the eating disorder is feeling. So talking about it beforehand can really help alleviate some of that. Some form of negotiation will probably need to happen, because there's going to be some things that the person is going to find really difficult to manage. And I think at Christmas time, it's really okay to negotiate that. Often if a person is in treatment, they might be following a certain eating plan or a certain routine around food, and it might be quite strict. But I think some flexibility around it at Christmas time, just to make it safer for them and also less stressful for you if you're the one who's in the family preparing the food and very conscious of whether they're going to eat it or not. It can help for the person to create a list of things that help them to cope, and maybe share that with the person who's kind of in charge of making the Christmas Day work. So that could be something like, I want to eat the normal breakfast I usually eat, or I want to be able to go out for a walk at a certain time. So to allow those types of things to happen. Again, it's also really important to remember that it is just one day, and that, it will end and there will be the next day. So to put it all in perspective. That just because it's this one day where there is a gathering that's focused around the meal, doesn't mean that it needs to knock everything else out of kilter. That it is just this one day, to put it in that kind of perspective. If there is a family member that the person can identify as the one that they could maybe say, if they're feeling stressed, that they could talk to, that can also really help. If there's one person that they know they can go to and say, actually, I'm feeling really awful after having that, or, because there's probably going to be people in the house that aren't normally there, and there might be an awareness of the person with the eating disorder and whether they're eating or not eating and that. So it is important that they have somebody that they can confide in, somebody that they can work things out around the day with. Writing down the feelings can help, and it can help put perspective on it. I suppose there's so much around an eating disorder that's tied up in the person's head, and if they're able to articulate what all the eating disorder thoughts are, the distorted thoughts in their head, so if they're able to write them down, it can give them some perspective on it and put it into context and make it not seem so overwhelming for them, and that can really help. Again, having some control maybe around the cooking can be important. So maybe that they could have a conversation with the person who is preparing the meal around something maybe that they feel okay with, can help as well. So it might be that they, don't like mashed potato, but they'll eat boiled potato or something like that. I mean, there's so many variations. But that can really help to have some kind of, to feel in control in some way over what's going to be put in front of them. And, for the person preparing the meal to also know it is just one day, and what it's about is everyone feeling less stressed and, having some enjoyment in the day. So, if it's for that one meal, then so be it. Again, if the day starts to become stressful, that person is allowed to take some time out for themselves, that they're able to go and be on their own, or, go for a little walk, or go to their room and just have some time out from the crowd, to calm their thoughts down, to put things in perspective. That can be a way of alleviating that stress, because they will often want to stay, to make sure everyone's all right, to make sure that they're not creating any problems, so that no one is worrying about them. But if people are kind of aware that at a certain point during the day they might want to leave and be on their own, well, then that's fine, and I think that can be very helpful. To be prepared, I suppose, if there's new people in the house or people who aren't always there, to be prepared for there maybe to be comments around food and around their eating that they aren't usually hearing or that they don't usually hear. To think through how they might respond to those, and to think through what it might be like not to respond defensively. So to be, to have a kind of something in their back pocket, I suppose, to be able to say, well, I'm coping with something at the moment and I'm taking it at my own pace and I'm fine, but not to get defensive around it. And if they think through, I suppose it's all about expectations, isn't it? It's about not creating these huge expectations on themselves and putting things in perspective. And if they're able to think through how they might respond to somebody making a comment about them or their weight or what they're eating, well then, if that situation does come up, they'll be better prepared for it. And I suppose being prepared for it all is key to having a less stressful Christmas. Well, as we all know, being prepared. Although I should talk, I'm doing my shopping last minute. But it's important to remember that it's all right for the person, to be happy as well, to enjoy the day. Because I suppose enjoyment is so much a part of the control that happens around an eating disorder, and there can be so much weighing up, well, if I enjoy myself, have I let go? And then they can have very negative thoughts about that. So for them to understand that it's all right for them to enjoy the day, and that there's lots more pleasurable parts to that day apart from just the food and the drink, although that will obviously seem the most difficult hurdle for them during the day. Just whatever way it turns out, to remember that Christmas is just one day out of all of the days of the year. And, to have a realistic expectation of it is really important. Because with the perfectionist thinking and with the all or nothing thinking, to be able to put it into some kind of context that it is just this one day is going to be really important. And not only for the person, but for the family around the person, supporting that person, to remember that is going to be really important. To try and help the person to accept themselves as they are. That it's all right for them to find this Christmas day difficult. Again, it's not about feeling that we have to enjoy it. We may find it difficult, but to accept them as they are, to accept that that's okay. And I suppose trying to stay in the present, trying not to anticipate too much of what they're going to feel like the next day. Because often the way the eating disorder works for a person is that it works to kind of stop them being in the moment with all the anticipatory fears about how they're going to feel about what they've done that day. So to try and stay in the moment and not anticipate too much how they're going to feel the next day. And I think that that's something that family members can really help with. They can remind the person, to stay in the moment, that it's all right as they are, that they're okay as they are. and that everybody is there to support them. And I think that that's the role that family members can really help with, you know, allowing them to have some control over the food and what they're eating, and to help them kind of stay in the moment, not create these huge expectations, to keep it all realistic, and to remind them during the day, you know, it's only one day and tomorrow is another day, we'll worry about that when we get to it. Okay. And I think if a person does start to feel overwhelmed, again, it's about having, if they've identified that person within the family that they can talk to, or if that person within the family who they've identified that they will confide in, if that person is maybe able to keep an eye on them, and if they notice that they've started to feel overwhelmed, you know, not to panic about it, but maybe take some time out to talk through what the thoughts are in their head, because it's really about talking out those thoughts. And if you can talk out those thoughts, then you'll go a long way to alleviating the anxiety and not relying then on bringing back the strict food control as a way of coping. So I hope that that helps in some way. And I suppose also to know that our support services are there over Christmas, so that if anyone did need that extra support, that they could contact us. But I guess just keeping it all in perspective and finding a way of having a role to play in it where the person can feel some sense of control over it is hugely important when we think about eating disorders. So thanks very much.